Hey everyone, RogueGold here, and today I have a pretty interesting discussion that I want to hold with you all, one that I've honestly been stewing on for quite a while. I've had this idea in my head for a good amount of time, and I don't know whether it was just never the right time or I didn't quite know how to tackle it. Regardless, I realize this might be my last good chance at a lull period within the Division community for a minute, considering we've got Heartland's Reveal coming this weekend, TU16 dropping for the Division 2 next week, so screw it, we're doing this thing. I want to talk about how I feel the Division 2 is becoming too vast, and this is really a culmination of a lot of deep and intense discussions and debates that people have been holding lately, myself included. Things like expertise's effect on the game in PvP, introducing new countdown difficulties, power creep, a lot of stuff. It should be pretty interesting. You might have to give me a little bit to really explain things out, though. I doubt this is going to be a very short video, so if you do want to join in on the discussion, give me the benefit of the doubt and hear me through to the end. I also want to give a few quick disclaimers before I fully dive in. Firstly, I am not making this video to say that I'm unhappy with the Division 2 in its current form, or that I'm disliking the direction the game is heading. If that were the case, I wouldn't so regularly and passionately be creating content for it. That said, with anything we enjoy for our leisure, we've all got our opinions, and we've all got ways that we think things could be better or different or changed to better fit our own preferences, and so who's to say that I'm right, quote unquote, about any of this? No one. I'm just a guy with a microphone, so keep that in mind. And then also, I'm going to be discussing some pretty game-wide concepts in this video, and it's important to keep in mind that as fair as I try and be in my assessments of things with the game and consider all different types of players' perspectives and desires and whatnot, I have not been in the center of this franchise's news cycle and content for many years now, and so undoubtedly that skews my viewpoint. All of this is to say is if you are perhaps a newer or more casual player and you hear me say some of these things that you may disagree with or have different opinions on, let me know, respectfully, of course, but this is all just for the sake of discussion, which I personally enjoy doing very much, so yeah, should be fun. That's all I had to say. Let's get into it. And by that, I mean I have no idea where to begin. As I said, I was motivated to make this video because of how many game-wide debates I've seen people having lately, and it's really just reminded me of how strange a territory we're really in with the Division 2 in this day and age. Although it was over a year ago, it doesn't feel that long ago when we thought Division 2 was done for. Massive's Star Wars game was announced, we weren't hearing anything about the Division 2, but then despite the fact that we heard Division 2 was in fact going to receive more content, in hindsight, we really now know that that was kind of a miracle that occurred, and now a year and a half later, we're finally into the new content release cycle. It still feels in many ways like the development team over at Massive is catching up, and much of that is simply because of their smaller team size compared to years past. I fully recognize and respect that. They're handling a very large and complex game with fewer resources. Obviously, things aren't always going to go the most smoothly, but really we're experiencing this second lease on life for the game, and to me, it doesn't quite feel like things have been calibrated to support this influx of new content. What do I mean by that? Well, one example would be expertise. A bit after TU15 released, we heard from Yannick that one of the reasons they added the optimization station in TU12 was because they believed that was going to be the final update for the game. Similarly to 1.8 in the Division 1, where it was first introduced, the devs view optimization as an end-of-life feature for a game. But clearly, Division 2 didn't actually end there. And so one of the reasons they felt compelled to even create the expertise system in the first place was to offer players some sort of outlet to continue their progression instead of everybody heading into year 4 already at the power ceiling. But what the introduction of expertise has really done is created some positive effect. I personally actually really enjoy the process of leveling up your expertise and seeing that displayed on your gear, but conversely, it's also now created these huge debates. Should it be active in the Dark Zone and PvP? If not, how do you go about taming it, or do you just straight up remove it? Do new players across the entire game now have too high a mountain to climb at the end game? Is it fair or morally ethical that the primary way people reach high expertise levels is by sitting on a single floor of the summit, killing a boss and wiping over and over again? Is that very dynamic? And I'm not really offering answers to any of these questions, but those are the questions being asked, along with many, many others across the entire game and other systems. Expertise is just one example. And while in years past, when the team was much larger, the devs might have been able to tackle some of these questions while staying on track with releasing new content, it very much feels to me like they're having enough struggle maintaining the current content production schedule as is, which leaves virtually no time or resources to be able to dedicate to alleviating or solving some of these other big problems, at least in any sort of timely manner. And as I said before, I don't blame the dev team for any of that. They are relatively speaking for this genre, a very small team that is taking on the huge task of keeping a game like The Division 2 running. And I have not a shadow of doubt in my mind that they are putting in their highest efforts to do the best work they can, and I infinitely commend that. But that doesn't mean that these big game-wide issues aren't piling up. And it isn't even just issues, quote unquote, in the sense of this new thing has caused a problem. There's also the question of content relevancy. Countdown, in a lot of ways, has invalidated the summit. Being able to choose your own targeted loot in these game modes has very much made the open world not relevant anymore. The dark zones remain practically obsolete for actual farming of high-quality gear. That's been the case ever since TU8. But again, I just don't think the devs have the bandwidth to really tackle many of these issues, certainly not all at once, when their continuation as a team in game is dependent on releasing consistent seasons and selling these season passes. People like Yannick have explained that back when they started on year 4 content, well, year 3 back then, they didn't know if people would return to the game after such a long content drought. They didn't know if they would get a year 5. And so, and this is purely an assumption on my part, I really doubt that, given those circumstances, they put their heads together and said, all right, let's go in and revamp a lot of the existing stuff, try and freshen it up, make it more exciting when thinking of what to do in year 4. No, they said, let's create a lot of fun new stuff that we think people will enjoy, that they've been requesting, and, have a fun year with it. Hence the new legendary missions in TU16, hence the fact that TU17 will have brought us our second new game mode in a 6-month time span. And while I am very stoked for that new game mode, as I was for Countdown, I foresee it playing out kind of similarly to where it itself will probably be quite fun, but it's just going to further invalidate stuff like bounties, open world activities, etc. I've used this terminology before when people ask me on stream and whatnot. If someone asks, is this a good time to get into the Division 2? Can I still catch up? I say pretty much any time is a fine time to start the Division 2 because unlike a lot of other games in the same genre, when Division 2 is updated or given new content, it's all added very horizontally, whereas something like Destiny 2 asks its players to consistently continue leveling up with a new power level cap in order to even be able to play the existing content. They also then produce yearly expansions, which are required in order to stay up to date. All of that stuff is very vertical. A new player has a larger climb ahead of them in order to be on the same playing field as the rest of the endgame population. Whereas with the Division 2, pretty much the only verticality in this game is Warlords. Once you beat Wony and you reach the endgame, there's not really another overarching goal. The game doesn't tell you, hey, reach X gear score to play this season's content, or go play this stuff in order to get the latest and greatest gear. No, the second you arrive back in DC, you can go in, set your world difficulty to normal, and go farm a targeted zone that has whatever loot you want. Whereas Destiny 2's progression would probably resemble, maybe not a skyscraper, but definitely a relatively tall building. Division 2 is like a single-story office building. Wony's completion puts you through the front door, and once you're inside, you can walk to any corner of the office you want. Nothing is restricted, nothing is locked off. It's all accessible, and that's great. That's a very different approach that many other looter shooters take, and I think that's helped it out in a lot of ways. But at the same time, I'm beginning to feel like it's becoming slightly detrimental. Whereas the game may have used to feel like an office building, it's now turned into a bit of a grocery store, where unless you have the knowledge or guidance to go seek something out, you might never even find the expertise system or really understand what it is. I mean, it's bundled into the recal station where there's now 4 tabs of progression options there. That's like the equivalent of expertise being on the top shelf of the pet food aisle. You know what I mean? Like every time they add another countdown to the game or whatever, that's where everyone's going to congregate. But then the opposite side of the store starts to get pretty barren. And then you mix stuff in like the debates and issues with expertise, for example. Maybe one of the shelves on that pet food aisle collapses. Someone's got to go fix it. Well, they don't have enough workers. The team is consumed developing new stuff in order to keep their customers coming back to the store, to keep the game running and getting greenlit for more content. Whereas in that more vertical progression example, once the developers create the floor of a building with the set start and finish point parameters of what the players need to do, they can then move on to working on the next floor and know that the players will be fully content and guided through the previous one. There's no cross-contamination, whereas everything in Division 2 mixes with everything else. And that can be great, or it can lead to issues where the devs don't always have the capacity to fix things. So this has all been a very long-winded way of saying I think there's 2 things that the Division 2 sorely needs in its current format, and that is a bit of structure and more revamps. Again, I fully acknowledge that the team is small. I'm not even saying these things might even necessarily be achievable, but I'm simply pointing out what I think are troubling the game the most at the moment. To go back to the building metaphor, I don't think or want the Division 2 to become Destiny 2, where you've got a 15-story building of progression, but rather than, a single-floor grocery store as it currently is, I think it could use a second or third floor, and not even necessarily with new stuff, just a reformatting of everything we currently have to create a more cohesive experience. Because like I said, to go back to expertise, I've had people ask me when they can access it, how they can access it. I've had people ask me where the best targeted loot is, how to target loot, what drops where. The horizontal format is great in the sense that these newer players can access whatever they want, but I think many are beginning to get lost in the vastness. Now, one current example I can think of something that I think is immensely positive in remedying this issue is the specialization revamp that they're working on. Specializations are a great example of an aspect of the game that's rather fundamental. I mean, you have one active on you at all times once you reach the end game, but over the years, they have continued to become less and less impactful or important to your build and overall setup, to the point where your specialization choices these days is really usually only based on 1 to 2 perks. The revamp, at least what they've said their goals with it are, is to revitalize the entire system, make signature weapons impactful to gameplay again, unlock a bunch of the restricted items in the specs to make everything more universal, redo the skill trees to make the perks far more impactful to your playstyle and your build, therefore making you choose which ones you want to run, and making the unlock system for specs far more straightforward with a linear unlock system. I think and have thought ever since it was announced that the spec rework is a fantastic thing that they're doing, and I think it will greatly benefit the current game. But guess what? Just like I said, they don't really have the capacity to be doing anything other than new content right now. The spec revamp is currently 4 months late, and it has no announced release date, and it's just the first in a long line of what I feel are other parts of the game that need similar treatments of revitalizing their relevancy. I think and have said recently that the DZ is in desperate need of some big overhauls to make it that prime endgame farming spot again. I said earlier that I think the open world and targeted loot allocation in general needs some rethinking, since Summit and Countdown exist now, right? Ways to give those parts of the game their own unique incentive. I made a video recently about how New York City really needs some love and it's severely underused. There's a huge number of old talents and brand sets and gear sets that are simply not at all useful or relevant. Those need work. Storage has been a big topic lately as the devs continually add more items with each new season to a finite storage system. How can we expand that in creative ways, since they've said we're at a technical capacity on the stash and whatnot? Difficulty is another big one, with the expertise system being an evolving thing. How do they plan on keeping the content relevant when we one day get up to 30% extra damage on weapons and whatnot? I mean, the list goes on. The spec revamp is just the first thing that needs addressing, and that'll likely be 6 months late at best. So really, all of this is to say that in an ideal world, I really think we need an update 1.4 right now. If you don't know what I'm talking about, 1.4 was the update that many believe pretty much saved the Division 1. The first half of Division 1's first year of post-launch was rocky. It had some ups and it had a lot of downs. And so because they were in a position where so many players were displeased with so much of the endgame, they literally pushed back their next content drop and plopped 1.4 in between these big updates. And it didn't introduce any new content, I don't believe. Or maybe it added like one gear set, I don't know. But it completely revitalized the endgame, from introducing world tiers for more controllable difficulty. It tackled vendor stocks and relevancy, a bunch more stuff that is slipping my mind. I mean, it was 6 years ago. But in essence, it is quite comparable to the kinds of issues I believe we need addressed today. I think we need a bit more structure in the endgame. One example would be, I think, having a much more clear and refined weekly objective board. I think that would be immensely beneficial. Projects are supposed to fill this role, but not only are they hidden on your map, but many of them just aren't that worthwhile. I think having some sort of big physical board you can interact with in the social space that details your daily and weekly objectives with relevant rewards and loot would be incredibly beneficial for both newer and more veteran players, and could begin to address those issues of irrelevant content. And then, all of those things I listed off earlier, the DZ, New York, targeted loot, talent, storage, difficulty, if the devs were to have the ability to dedicate one single update to tackling a bunch of these problems at once to set a better foundation for the future, I think that would be worth it. But now, unfortunately, like I said earlier, I don't know if that's even a viable option given the team's size and resources and their sales expectations to keep the game getting more content. Maybe they could bundle that in with just a new season and make that work, but I have no idea. Maybe that would be too risky. So those are really a lot of my thoughts about Division 2's current state. As I said, clearly I am still enjoying the game as much as ever. I'm excited for TU16, excited for the new game mode and that's coming and all of that. I mean, and they are focusing a bit more on quality of life stuff with TU16. We're getting the spec weapon hiding, character recustomization, SHD watch changes, reworks to 2 old gear sets, and that's all great. but it's far below the scope of what I feel the game probably needs in order to reach that level of cohesiveness that I talked about. That transition from a single floor supermarket to a 2 to 3 floor office building. In my view, the type of player I am, I feel like that would be the right direction to go, but maybe you all disagree, and that's perfectly fine. Either way, I will be curious to find out if the new ETF Foxtrot team might be tackling some of these big game-spanning issues and debates. We should be hearing about that pretty soon, and I wouldn't be surprised if this were the case. I mean, 1.4, that update I was talking about, that was the update that kicked off the ETF program to begin with Alpha. And so with the ETF, with the devs now knowing that they have another year to work on things with year 5, maybe they can now begin to work out some of those long-term plans of how to tackle a lot of these things. I can certainly hope so, because again, as I said, for the sake of the game's longevity and cohesion, I think tackling some of these big pillars before adding more stuff on top of them would be the right move to make. But we'll see how things shake out. I will always be a fan and support the division, so I certainly hope this has been taken entirely through a constructive lens, because that is absolutely what it was intended as. Thank you all so much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and be sure to subscribe with notifications on to be updated every time I upload. Let me know your thoughts about any and all the things we discussed in this video. As I said at the start, this has kind of been a culmination of many different topics and debates lately for me, because I feel like as disconnected as some of these issues may seem, they represent this kind of overarching root cause, at least what I believe is causing a lot of them. And again, that does not mean I'm not enjoying the game, but I think it could improve, as I'm sure we all do. So who knows? Ubisoft Forward is this Saturday. We're sure to get a glimpse into the future of what awaits for the Division 2 there. And between that and as we inch closer to year 5, I'm excited to see what the devs have planned. I have no doubt they're going to continue trying their best to make the game as great as it can be. But that's going to do it for me today, everybody. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. And until the next one, guys, RogueGold out.